sense of soul. It's time to awaken.
So years ago, a listener who became a dear friend of mine, she knew I was studying the Gnostic Gospels, and she sent me a YouTube channel. This very extraordinary guy who looked like a rock star. He was giving voice to the voiceless and was sharing stories untold. I listened and I followed and I learned so much. Not only was this guy very intelligent, I've come to find out that he can even swallow a sword. You may know him from the Freak Show, but I know him as a thought leader and the founder of the Neogenian system. A new system, a new way of being that allows us to shed our old selves and embrace our true selves. His successful YouTube channel has over 468,000 subscribers with over 35 million views. His strong message is about creating a new humanity and a new earth through a new consciousness. I'm super honored and excited that he is with us today. Please welcome Morg.
Yeah, it's funny. People originally knew me as like from being on the Freak Show and sword swallowing and didn't know that I had this philosophical aspect. Now it's kind of the reverse. People are familiar with my philosophical work and they're like, wait, you swallow swords as well? But yeah, no, so I got into this, I grew up in a strict Christian household, and leaving Christianity is what really made me strive for a number of things, particularly trying to understand reality as lucidly as possible, and just constantly, being in the mindset of exploration and pushing oneself. And this eventually led to sword swallowing. In a roundabout way, it was basically because I was inspired by Nietzsche's philosophy of self-overcoming. And I had a lot of inbuilt fears. I had a fear of public speaking, so I would take public speaking classes and do open mic nights and do street performances to get over that. I had a fear of hypodermic needles, and I would end up I started piercing myself every day to get over that. I don't recommend anyone do that, but that's what I did. And this kind of led me to see just like how far I could push the body. And this is eventually what got me into my stunt work, my sword swallowing, all the different acts that I do. And the acts are very symbolic for me. I laid on a bed of razor blades and broke a mirror across my chest to symbolize destroying the old self and creating the new self. I've swallowed the scythe to represent overcoming the fear of death. So a lot of my stunt work is symbolically tied to some of the philosophical topics that I discuss as well. So that's how I got into the sideshow, Freak Show. I was on a couple of seasons of a TV series that documented the Freak Show that I hosted. And in tandem, while doing all this, I was also interested in understanding reality. So this led me to studying occultism, esoterica, philosophy, mathematics, quantum physics, altered states of consciousness, and developing a system of understanding existence as lucidly as possible as well. So I kind of was doing both of these things in tandem with each other.
Well, as good as you are swallowing a sword, I mean, I tell you what, you are really good at what you do. You are such a good teacher, Morg.
Well, thank you.
I really, truly appreciate. Yeah, you're really good at just talking about subjects that are a little taboo or heresy.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Let
thank
me
you. I
be
appreciate
triggered by
that. I
that
want
word.
people to be able to understand as easily as possible. And that's the thing. Either these topics are considered taboo, or they're extremely difficult to understand, or they're scattered across all these different disciplines. And I just want to make the information, it's not about like trying to convert people or anything like that. It's about making the information available easily for those who want it.
You've also given a voice to what I would call the divine feminine, the stories of like Norea and Lilith and stories we haven't heard before.
Absolutely, because modern Christianity and, just Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity has really turned it into like a patriarchal system and tried to erase all the voices of the divine feminine from religion. And there are so many inspirational characters like Asherah, the wife of God. And like you had mentioned, Lilith is another fabulous character, as well as Sophia in the Gnostic Gospels. And Barbelo, who is like the mother of
Oh, God.
everything. The first emanation of the source that births all reality, is Barbelo, the mother, and Norea, Eve's daughter, who like takes on the archons and triumphs over them with power and light and fire. Really, like
Powerful.
one of the things that I really like about the Gnostic Gospels is how much they emphasize the power of the feminine. I think that's amazing. And I think that's something the church is very afraid of.
Absolutely. That's it. Yeah. And it's really amazing stories that, had I grown up with, would have been extremely powerful for me.
Right.
And, I think that it is so powerful just as a woman, but, I mean, I share these stories with my younger daughters and letting them know, wow, this was an independent woman who refused to lay beneath, right?
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't some witch or, hag, as they end up calling her, but, she was the first virgin, which means independent woman.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I love that. And it's a lot of themes usually of males trying to dominate the divine feminine and the divine feminine rising up against that. Like you noted, like you had
Yeah.
just mentioned, like Lilith. And the same with the story of Norea. And Norea, it's part of the Gnosticism. So the God of the Bible is looked at as an evil being, and he tries to force himself on Norea. And that's when she calls down light from the true realm, and him and his archons all run in fear, which I think is just so cool. I love all that.
Yeah, that's actually kind of what led me into my journey when I first decided to read the Bible kind of with new eyes.
Mhm.
And I mean, I didn't get past those first few chapters where I'm like, wait, what? What's going on here? This is
Mhm.
like, no one ever taught me this in Sunday school.
Yeah, the Bible, I feel like a lot of people aren't even very familiar with what is in the
Nope.
Bible, because there almost every atrocity you can possibly imagine is not just in the Bible, but sanctioned or commanded or committed by God.
Yep.
And it's so bad that I have a hard time doing live streams about it because it's so graphic. You're like, oh wow, how am I going to talk about this story that has all this, all these words that I can't say on YouTube
Genocide.
because
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
like yeah, terrible things. And it's like these are the books that they want taught to children and everything, and there's some horrible stuff in there.
One thing that got me, I think at the very beginning, very curious, right?
Mhm.
Through my journey, one of the first things I asked myself was, how much of what I believe in have I been told to believe? How much had I really experienced to be my truth? Like,
Mhm.
could I speak on what I believe? And I was really stumped. And so that's when I kind of became a person who wanted to live by my own experiences. Like, no one can take that from me.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
So many people don't have the strength of mind or independence to even most people, so many people say that they want freedom or free will, but they don't, because it's scary, it's frightening, because now you're responsible for yourself. You have to take, responsibility for your own actions. You don't have
Mhm.
someone or some entity commanding you to do certain things. You have to be, truly strong and independent. And so many people, like I said, they say they want freedom, but they don't actually. They want someone to be directing their life, making all the hard decisions for them, like this, cosmic father figure, but not a
Mhm.
great, not a good one. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Is that most people are completely conditioned. Their beliefs aren't their own. It's a product of culture. It's a product of parenting. It's a product of the school system. All these external forces are just constantly barraging you immediately since birth, and by the time, you don't even really fully develop your ability to reason until like your mid 20s. And so you're constantly shaped by external forces, and very few people realize that, they aren't in control of their own minds. They're not their own person. They're someone else that has
Right.
been molded by externality.
Yeah. And coming out of that, I think that for myself, I did like what you did. Like I was seeking, right,
Mhm.
different things, researching different things and going down some holes,
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
deep diving. And you can really get lost in that as well. And
Absolutely.
one of the things I love, and I was in a deep dive with Sophia at the time that I had come across you. And one of the things I'd love for you to speak on is being logical and
Metarationalism.
Yeah.
having that, I think I think it's like a brain filter theory. I also remember you
Mhm.
talking about and really, really stuck with me. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, of course. So I've developed a system of thought called the Neogenian system, which is about creating oneself, creating a new humanity, and creating a new Earth through a new consciousness. And part of this is, like you said, metarationalism. So there's different aspects. Like, for example, the part that we were just discussing about removing all the conditioning systems to be able to create your own self, that's an aspect of the Neogenian system, which is Neogenesis, to create a new beginning in oneself. So, but the aspect you're talking about, metarationalism, yeah, that's extremely important. And so basically what metarationalism is about understanding metaphysics rationally. And a lot of people conflate like reason with, oh, you mean like scientific materialism, like atheistic science. And no, that's not what it means at all. Atheistic, materialist science is actually an empirical system, which is based on sensory experience. So what you see is what you get, basically. And so metarationalism, however, is paired with the idea that we can understand the substructure of existence, the metaphysical aspect of reality, the immaterial, the spiritual, the mental, whatever you want to call it. We can understand it as rigorously as we understand the physical world, through reason, through mathematics, through logic, etc. And it's not about, because some people think, oh, wow, that sounds really cold. But it's not about denying things like intuition or emotions. It's about understanding that each thing has its place. Like intuition is what connects you to the source and allows you to get all this inspiration about reality, but it's very chaotic. It's like a dream. A lot of it's archetypal and symbolic. So that should be then analyzed with reason to kind of filter it, see what makes sense, see what doesn't. Because, like dreams as an example, if you took all your dreams to be literally true, you'd be in big trouble.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they're not important. They tell you a lot about your unconscious. So it's the intuition can tell you a lot about reality, but it has to be filtered through reason. So essentially, the system of meta-rationalism is about using reason and mathematics to understand how the metaphysical aspect of reality, spiritual aspect, minds, souls, can be understood through reason.
So sense of soul, I've had a lot of woo-woo on my podcast, psychics and, channelers, and I love to hold space because I'm open to learn new things.
That's great.
And also, have a safe space for people to share their stories. But, I have come to realize in my own personal journey over the years, and also probably with the help of much of your teaching, that a lot of the things that I receive are from my higher self, or if you want to say your soul. So sense of soul. You don't call it soul, but you do talk about soul. You call it a zeta. Can you speak about that and what the zeta is? And you also probably will connect it to what most of us call God, which is a triggering word to some people, and you call it absolute.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No pun intended. But so first of all, I love what you said about being connected to your higher self, because yeah, that's exactly right. Is that a lot of people mistake this for being some external entity or whatever, but no, you're actually connecting. You as an eternal soul are such an infinitely powerful being that when people experience it, they think, wow, I'm experiencing some external creator God, but no, it's actually your power that you're coming into contact with, which is just so exhilarating. But yeah, so in the Neogenian system, I typically don't use words like soul or God, etc., but you certainly can, because all these different words are just like a different language for expressing the same thing. And so it depends who, if I were, trying to talk to, say, a physicist, I wouldn't be talking about the soul or God. I'd be talking in terms of like frequency and quantum physics. But people who are familiar with terms like soul and God, et cetera, I don't mind. I will use those terms sometimes. They're just not my go-to. They're not my preferred terms. But yeah, so in the Neogenian system, we have the concept of a zeta, which would be the concept of a soul. So we look at this as being a collection of mathematical frequency patterns. So a soul, or an eternal mind, or a zeta, whatever you'd like to call it, is a collection of frequency patterns, mathematical frequency patterns, that can be arranged into different patterns, which is what facilitates basically the evolution of the soul. So the idea is that the soul is a system of mathematics, a system of frequency that's exploring its own transformations. And so when a soul is to, say, reincarnate, or as I prefer to use the term, relocalize on Earth through an avatar, through a body, when you're going through life, you're essentially gathering training data for your soul as you experience, as you learn, as you grow. You as the soul, because what you really are is a soul. Some people think, oh, I have a soul. No, you are a soul. What you are is a soul. You have a body. And so as you're going out, learning, exploring, having experiences. Your soul is evolving these frequency functions within the mind being the soul. And so in terms of God, what I term like the absolute would be the collection of all zetas or all souls together. So it would be like the network. So God isn't something different from us. It is what we are. God is sort of experiencing itself through all of its nodes or through all of its souls, but it's not something separate. It's kind of like the relationship between like a brain and neurons. A brain is made up of neurons, and all the neurons work together to form this cohesive brain. But the only problem right now is that we as God we don't know that we're God yet. So it's sort of like a brain that isn't totally working all together as a unit. It's confused, and the different neurons are fighting against each other. And this is why we have all these problems in the world, because people don't realize that at base, we are all connected. And, this is why we should be treating each other well, because the experiences that we're having are all really our experiences, just from different perspectives, just from different vantage points. Yeah. So, and by the way, if you have some of this, can get like mathematically technical. So if you want me to go into more detail on anything, please let me know, because,
Oh, well, my listeners know that I always say that I am math magical. I'm not
I love that.
mathematical at all.
Math magical. I love that. Yeah. But see, here's the thing is that mathematics is taught in school so poorly. And
Yeah,
it's,
it's
I've heard
ridiculous.
one mathematician, I forget who it was exactly, but it's like mathematics is like painting, and going to school is like learning how to paint fences. And so the reason most people hate math, I hated math. I couldn't stand math until
You
I
did?
understood. Oh
Oh,
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I did not know that.
Oh yeah, I hated it until I understand that you could reveal
Mm,
the essence of the soul and the nature of existence through it. Once I realized that you can use it to like map out frequency and understand,
yeah.
when you understand these patterns and how they evolve, you're understanding how the soul evolves. And that I became extremely passionate about, because it's completely different than just
Mm,
like, calculating taxes or whatever the hell,
right.
people
Yeah.
use that for. So
Well,
yeah.
I guess it's the same with me. Like, I used to hate history, and now I'm a genealogist. So,
Oh, that's
I mean,
awesome.
I love history, and I
What
love,
changed your mind?
actually exposing, history for the truth, because we've been sold Yankee Doodle came to town riding on a pony, which is far from the truth.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like
So,
you've always had this desire to find truth, it seems like.
yeah. I'm like, why
That's
am I always the one that's exposing, everything?
I
But
wish
I
more
do feel
people
that
were
way.
like that. I mean, that's a very rare
Yeah.
quality. I think that's great. I wish more people had that. We'd be living in a much better world if that were the case.
I call myself divinely defiant. How about that?
I love that. That's perfect. Yeah, great.
So we talked about the soul. What about the avatar?
So,
And how
mhm.
does this come in, being Christian growing up? I mean, past lives was definitely not a concept that I had any knowledge on until I experienced my own past life regressions. And I had a young child tell me about how she was an old man when she was like 4 years old. And I was like, you were an old man before? And so it made me curious.
That is really interesting. Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Christianity does not have reincarnation, does not play a part in Christianity. What's really interesting, though, of course, I'm sure Gnosticism, it very much
Yep.
does. The whole Gnostic story is that we are trapped in these bodies in this cycle of reincarnation. And Jesus
Mhm.
Christ didn't come to save us from sin, but to try and get us to recognize that we're actually divine, so that we could achieve gnosis or knowledge and escape the cycle of reincarnation. So, I much prefer that narrative. But
Me
so in
too.
terms of the system that I promote, I look at reality as being a collective dream. So when you go to sleep and dream at night, essentially what's happening, because you are a system as a soul, you are a system of frequencies. And so when you go to
Mhm.
sleep and dream at night, in mathematics, there's something known as a Fourier transform, and this allows you to express frequency information as space-time information. And so when you go to sleep and dream, basically what you're doing is you're tuning into your own frequencies projected as a world. And so you're like exploring your mind, your internal frequency patterns, but projected as a dimensional world that you can explore. And even in the dream, you usually have a dream body and you're exploring it. And unless it's a lucid dream, you take it to be very, very real. So in
Mhm.
in the system I work in, the Neogenian system, waking reality is also a dream. The only difference is that it's a dream that's not just your frequencies, but the frequencies of every soul in existence. So since this reality is composed of the frequencies of every soul in existence, that means it's stable and persistent. So like when you go to sleep and dream it yourself, it's constantly changing. When you have different emotions, it'll, morph and change. And when you wake up, it's not there anymore, etc. But this particular reality is very stable and it does change, but very, very slowly, which is why we have evolution and things like that. But it changes and is stable very slowly because it's not just your frequencies, it's the frequencies of every soul, every mind in existence. So it's not yours alone to just, change on a whim like you could do in a personal dream. So in this context of this collective dream, bodies are projections of frequency patterns. And so evolution is occurring. And through this process of evolution, which is just frequency functions finding more stable patterns arising, becoming more complex, and bodies eventually evolve. And what bodies or avatars are essentially interfaces for zetas, where a zeta can interface with an avatar that allows a zeta to have a localized experience of the physical reality. So essentially what it is it's kind of like, I always compare it to a virtual reality video game. If, you think of you sitting in your room, or on the couch in the living room, and you take a virtual reality headset on and you put it on, now you're immersed in this virtual world because that headset is feeding you information of that virtual world. But you're really still in your living room. You're not actually in the world. You're still sitting in the living room. So a zeta or a soul always exists in the spiritual domain, always exists in the mental domain, always exists in the domain of mind, of the frequency domain. But when it interfaces with an avatar or a body, it's like putting the headset on. And so the information that it's fed is of the physical world. It tunes the information that it has available to this specific localized domain. And that's where you had mentioned brain filter theory before. That's where brain filter theory comes in, where the brain is not something that generates the mind, but rather filters and conditions the mind. And the mind being the same thing as a soul or a zeta. We use the same term to refer to the same thing. A mind, a soul, and a zeta. They're all the same thing. So a mind, soul, zeta interfaces with the brain, and this limits and filters it and kind of like tunes it, like watching a specific channel on TV or tuning a radio.
Okay. So that's like the eternal mind that you speak of, which is
Yes.
also Zeta. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And soul over. So is there like an avatar mind that would be more of the ego, or is that
We
not separate?
it was not separate, but we could think of it as like a subset of it. So we could think of the egoic mind or consciousness as being a subset of you as an eternal mind. So, if you think of you as an eternal mind, as this circle, inside of it, a circumscribed, much smaller circle would be like consciousness or ego consciousness. So yeah, you as an avatar, and most people associate themselves. Most people identify with their ego. They go, oh yeah, I'm John and I'm a chiropractor and I have 3 kids, blah, blah, blah. But we know that's not who they really are. That's just one aspect of themselves that they're currently experiencing. And so it's still part of them as a mind, but yeah, it's a filtered subset, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. So what is the purpose then of the Zeta returning, and is it evolving?
People always ask me, what's the meaning of life? And it's relatively simple. The meaning of life is to understand it and to enjoy it, because we're here for 2 reasons. One reason that we're here is because we are literally God. We are the absolute that has partitioned itself to explore itself and enjoy its creation, but also to understand itself better in all of its various transformations. And it goes hand in hand, because the more we understand ourselves, the better conditions we can create to have better experiences and to enjoy life more. And so this is what I talk about a lot in the Neogenian system. Our aim is to create a teleocratic planetary civilization, which means a purposeful world that's geared towards maximizing the quality of life for everyone. And so in that sense, it's about understanding that right now, our world is pretty trashy because we have people who are running it who don't give a crap about any of us, only themselves. And so everyone has a very lowered state of consciousness, lowered state of understanding, and not a high quality experience. So basically, the purpose is to understand reality and each other so we can realize, oh, guess what? We're all in this together. We're all parts of
Mhm.
the same network. So let's create a system we all can flourish and have a positive experience.
A woman.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
I was in a Gnostic circle about a little over a year ago,
Oh,
and
interesting.
I rarely have experiences like I like heard something in my mind, and it was very clear, and it came in very quickly, and it was a feminine, energy. I
Mm-hmm.
sensed it, and it said, "I belong to no one, and I am home to all."
Oh, I love that.
And this past year, very strongly, it was like I had years of trying to know thyself, really who
Mhm.
I was. I had to drop all these conditions. I had to learn self-love for the first time. I mean, no one talked more shit to myself than me.
Mm-hmm.
But then it was more of a wholeness. It became that we are one.
Mm-hmm.
And if if we are one, then I must love you as much
Mm-hmm.
as I found love within myself. But it did
Absolutely.
start with me. It did start with me because there was so much healing that needed to be done
Oh, yeah.
before I could understand that I was part of you, Morg, and you were part of me.
Absolutely. Of course. I belong to no one, but I'm home to all. Was that it? That's
I
beautiful.
belong to no one,
I
not
belong to no one.
nobody, but no one person, no
Uh-huh.
one, and I am home to all.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, that's so good.
shocked.
I think that's amazing. That's beautiful. But you're absolutely right that it does start with yourself. And a lot of people
Mhm.
ask like, "Oh, well, what can I do? How can I help, etc." Well, the first thing is to work on yourself because we're all, there's nothing wrong with working on yourself. Some people think like, "Oh, I always have to just be super selfless and constantly serve others," which helping others is great and a huge part of it, but you yourself as an individual are also part of the network. And so the more that you work on yourself and understand yourself and give yourself a good experience, the more well equipped you're going to be able to help others in the long run.
Yeah. Another thing that I'm curious about, and synchronicity is crazy, and I'm
Mm.
sure it's just because we are all connected,
Mhm.
like we're all those neurons. And, I've learned to lean into it. It does seem magical, right?
Yeah.
Synchronicity. I remember when I first start experiencing it years ago, of course, with awareness, right?
Hmm.
Awareness, you have to have that. But without it, I think I'd be lost. I mean,
Yeah.
it's more than coincidence, right? It is, in which you have to, kind of filter through. Like that's just a coincidence, right? This
Yeah.
isn't, you know,
Yeah.
synchronicity. There's a huge difference.
Yeah, so synchronicity, I find that to be fascinating. And, I'm
Mhm.
sure this began with Carl Jung discussing
Or
it,
young.
which is, yeah, and
Mhm.
as I'm sure you also know, Carl Jung was extremely into Gnosticism, highly
Yeah.
intelligent
Mhm.
psychiatrist, psychologist, coined the word introvert, extrovert, brought in so much work with archetypes and the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
But yeah, so synchronicity is essentially most people understand it as meaningful coincidences, and that's a real, quick way to understand it. The more like technical way to understand it is when an external event mirrors an internal event. So Carl
Oh, there
Jung
you go.
always gave the story of he was talking with a patient of his about a dream that she was having, and they were discussing in her dream she had a dream about this particular beetle, and it was a very rare kind of beetle. It
Yeah.
wasn't a common beetle, very rare, hard to find sort of beetle. And as they're discussing this, they hear a tapping at the window, and they look, and that exact kind of beetle was right at the window.
Right.
So this is a good
Right.
example of synchronicity where something external matches something that was internal. And so
Mhm.
synchronicity can essentially work because at root, we're all connected together. We're not consciously aware of it, but at the root and base of reality and the collective unconscious, we are all connected together. So we have an unconscious sense of the entirety of reality, more or less, but at a very, very low level. It's not something that's easily accessible, but this can definitely
Mhm.
facilitate synchronicities. Now, but like you said, and you're absolutely right, is that again, we have to use reason to filter them because not every
Mhm.
coincidence we have is going to be in a
Yeah.
synchronicity. Sometimes it's just a coincidence. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's why when we have these, we can look at them and be like, oh, wow, is this really a synchronicity, or is it really a coincidence, or is it something else? And how I look at these sort of things as well is because synchronicity is something that I want to study more and understand, like in a formal way. There are, like, Carl Jung wrote a book about it with a physicist that's very interesting about how it could relate to like quantum mechanics and reality. But how I look at this sort of stuff is, at the end of the day, if you have a certain experience, is it something you can learn from, and is it something that can help you in life? And at that point, it doesn't really matter if it's like a real synchronicity or if it was just a coincidence. Of course, if your goal is to just like know truth, then yeah, it would matter. But if it's more of your goal to use what is useful to your life and growth, then it doesn't really matter. It's kind of like, I talk about this with dream analysis as well. So like dream analysis,
Yeah.
you have a dream, and then you analyze it to be like, okay, what is my unconscious trying to tell me? And you go through this process of trying to figure out what the dream is about. And then you realize, oh, it means that I need to incorporate this aspect of my shadow self or whatever. Or I need to repair this relationship, or I need to be in touch with more of these kinds of energies within myself or something. But at the end of the day, whether your dream actually meant that or not doesn't matter if it helped you in the end.
Right.
So I look at, there's two different aspects to existence. There's the very formal mathematical aspect where you're trying to discover like rigorously what is reality made of and how does it function. And then there's the growth aspect, which involves a lot of intuition and symbolism and dreams. And that's a lot less rigorous and more artistic and more energetic and more intuitive. So yeah, you kind of have both of these different aspects.
That like resonance.
Yes.
That's what I feel like sometimes if I was meditating for, a lot. I feel like even the solar storms actually raise my vibration. They also kick my ass, but there's like this up and down. I'm very affected, by the energy of whatever's going on planetary. It's also just because I'm very aware, right? So all of that meditation and me being very conscious of my body and what I'm experiencing because of, say a full moon or something, I just become more aware. And I think that's why maybe I see them too. So
yeah, that's very interesting. And I can kind of relate in a way. I'm not, not really so much with physical aspects, but when things are going on in the world emotionally or energetically, that affects me very much. So like when COVID first hit and we had so much chaos in the world, like I was really affected by that. I could barely get out of bed or barely, and it wasn't because something was happening to me, but just because of all, there was a lot of like civil unrest and whatnot too going on at that time. And that's something that I'm very much connected to.
Oh my gosh, that's why I find your channel and you very refreshing, because I get away from that with you, because there's no dogma, there's no judgment, there's no BS, there's no politics, Thank you. Because
of
you have
course.
taken me away from that, because I always tell people, stop watching the news. It's just so toxic.
Yeah, I mean, so personally, I try and keep a balance where I do want to be informed with what's going on, but so much of it is designed to make you afraid because for so many different reasons, for control, for just viewership and getting clicks and views, etc. So much is sensationalized. So I do try and take a balance where I want to know what is happening in the world, but you can't just get so consumed by it where you can't function anymore.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are going through that. But I do too. And I think all people are empaths, And so I definitely feel like even if I don't watch the news,
Yes.
I can feel like there's this energy around me that seems, chaotic.
Yeah. Yeah, I always
So I
felt that
can
that
I
was
relate
very,
that.
very interesting. And I'm wondering if, that's another area that I want to discover more with regard to people being so, I mean, I know we are all connected, but a way of like studying it in a more objective way, because it's something really interesting that I noticed when I was a street performer, because I would street perform all over California, a bunch of different parts. And I would notice that if, I'd go perform in one part and sometimes people wouldn't be in great mood, super happy. And then other times they'd be just like, oh, bad moods and, just didn't want to laugh at anything or whatever. And it was so odd because I noticed like if it was like that in one part, it was like that in a lot of
Right.
other parts as well. And I was like, that's so
Mhm.
interesting. You know, everyone sort of has this like almost like collective mood. It's very interesting.
Right. Well, and I'm not really into astrology, but I know a lot of astrologists. So
Hmm.
they'll like, is there something weird going on? They're like, yep.
Yeah.
And they'll fill me in. And I'm like, I don't understand it necessarily, but um I've had a lot of astrologers on, and it's very interesting because there seems to be like these cycles, right, that we
Mhm.
go through that are almost predictable, I
Personally,
think.
I don't subscribe to astrology, but I do think that there is some kind of energetic force, not necessarily. And so I take a
Right.
more like Jungian approach. So Carl Jung had the same idea with astrology. Essentially, that astrology is a rich system of symbolism and representation, but doesn't necessarily have to do with the positioning of the planets, etc. And I sort of take the
Right.
same stance that it's a very rich archetypal symbol system of symbolism that we
Mhm.
can use to understand, just like anything else, like Gnosticism or tarot cards, etc. All of that is
Yeah.
are great sources of rich symbolism for connecting with the unconscious.
Could it also be that we're like collectively manifesting certain things like Mercury retrograde,
Mm,
right?
mm, mm,
But however, if everyone on the planet thinks that that their computers are going to stop working or whatever,
mm.
then they might. Maybe we collectively manifest together.
You know, I think that collective manifestation is possible, but to what degree is it possible? I think that at a certain point where humanity becomes very interconnected and aware of their divine selves and highly conscious and probably even facilitated through technology of some kind, because I'm not against technology. I think a lot of it, like we're having this conversation right now via
Yeah.
technology, which allows us to spread information all across the world to, if this were thousands of years ago, you and I would be able to talk to like maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 people, but now we can have hundreds of thousands or
I
millions of
know.
people. So I think technology is a double-edged sword where it can be very coercive and destructive, but in another sense, it is also very connective as well.
Right, right. I love that about you more because even if, someone asks you a question during your live and says, hey, have you heard about this? Or do you think this? You will say no, like
Mm.
if you don't know, you're like,
Oh
no,
yeah.
I'm going to look into it. Right.
Oh yeah,
You're very
absolutely.
authentic,
Well,
very
thank you. I
authentic.
appreciate that. I mean, that's one thing is that I really like to be transparent and upfront because there's so many bullshitters out there, especially in
Oh
like the
boy.
new age and spiritual and mystical community. Oh my God. Like everyone's trying to be this guru and ultimately they just want your money and they don't know what to talk about. And so if I don't know something, I'll
Yep.
just like, oh, I don't know, or that's interesting. I'll look into it. And that's one thing, I think that's really important. And also I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. People can come in and if they
Right.
don't agree with me, that's totally fine. Again, it's just like, hey, here's this information. It's
Mhm.
there if you want it. I'm not like, no, you have to believe this or else you're an infidel. Or no, that's exactly what's so wrong with the world. So,
Right. Absolutely. I've had people on before who have huge followings and I've researched and read a lot of things, and
mm-hmm,
he didn't realize that I had. And I've
mm-hmm,
also interviewed a lot of people,
mm-hmm.
and some of the authors that he spoke of and that I know personally. And I totally called him out. I
Nice.
was, I didn't post his episode. I mean, I
Wow.
don't care how many people follow him
Yeah.
and I really think that people need to do their research or at least not believe everything you hear.
Oh, absolutely. That's
There's a lot of
awesome that you had
dangers
such you
out.
you have a lot of integrity. And I think that's great that you called someone out like that because
Yeah,
it's not if
I,
someone's
I
just
really almost wanted to post it.
it would be interesting. That's for sure. I mean, it's one thing if someone's just ignorant and you're like, okay, well they're still learning. But if they're actively
Intentionally.
harming
Yeah.
others,
A lot of funnies out there and they're just doing it for clicks and for popularity, but
and
Mork, you are not one of those.
oh,
You are not.
that's really sweet. I appreciate that. Yeah, and another thing I like to say too is, I tell people question everyone and everything. Like question what I have to
Yeah.
say, question what anyone has to say, because I don't
Mhm.
want people to just believe what I have to say, because that's not how ultimately I legitimately I want people to reach a higher state of consciousness if that's what they want.
Yeah.
And if you just believe what I have to say just because I'm saying it. That's not how you reach a higher consciousness. It's about understanding why. It's about doing the search yourself by going within and not just believing something, but understanding why something is the case. And that takes a lot of hard work. But if you don't, like, there's a million people saying a million different things out there. And, you know, thousands of years, it's always been know thyself. It's just been said over and over and over again, know thyself. And everyone's looking somewhere else except for inside. Yeah.
I love that. The kingdom is inside of you and outside of you. If you come to know yourself, you will be known.
That's
Book
one of my
Thomas. Love it.
favorites.
Me too.
I love that. I love that so much. Yeah, the kingdom is within you and it is outside of you. One of my favorite quotes from the Gospel of Thomas, because it's so true. And when you like really understand it, it's kind of the key to everything.
One of my favorites as well. You know, Morg, I appreciate you coming on Sense of Soul. I mean, I feel like you're my favorite, and I want everyone to go out and check out your book. You have a whole series.
Oh yeah. Oh, you got it. Nice. Excellent.
Oh
yeah, that's Neogenesis. That's book number 1. And that's the focus of that one is what we talked about near the beginning. It's about deconstructing your old self so that you can have the power to construct your new self.
Yeah. And then you have a total of 4, right?
So the first one is Neogenesis. The second one is what we talked about next was Metarationalism, which understands the mathematical nature of reality. And then Cosmogenesis is the third book, which describes the evolution of existence from the understanding that you are the reality understanding itself. There's 2 more to come out. They're not out yet, but those are the 3 in the series that are out at the moment. So yeah.
Oh, there's 2 more coming out.
2 more coming out.
Well, I have to catch up. And then you're also teaching this on Sundays, isn't that right?
Yeah, so in our Discord community, that's right. Yeah, in our Discord community, every Sunday we have live study sessions hosted by Neogenian presenters going over this material where we can have the community come on camera and ask questions and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Ooh, I love your community, by the way. Everyone in your chat is always so amazing. Yeah, I really do.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy about that.
And you need a vacation, by the way.
I do need, yes, you're right. Yes, it is. I have literally never taken a vacation in my life. Anytime I've ever traveled, it's been, except for when I was like 9 or something, but otherwise it's been for, some kind of work related thing. I do need a vacation. Yes.
You do. I've never known anyone to work so hard. You are a workhorse.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit, it's a blessing and a curse, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you do it. Tell everybody where they can find you, though, and where they can pick up your books.
Sure. So my main work you can find on YouTube, and it's just Morg Official, Morg like in a hospital, and official. And I'm on every other platform, Morg Official. So Instagram and TikTok. Well, TikTok, it's Morg_official, but pretty much every platform out there, Morg Official, you'll find it. I've started posting my videos to Spotify as well, so you can find that on Spotify. And then you can find my books on Amazon.
Well, thank you so much. And as a faithful follower of your channel and your work, thank you so much for all that you do at Astra.
I appreciate it so much.